This is the Morgan Kimbarow Show. Our guest today is Josiah O'Neill. He's lived a life of service to his country in the United States Army and law enforcement in the State Department. He is the host of the Defining Truth podcast, the author of the Defining Truth book that we have right here, and the CEO of the O'Neill Security Group. Josiah, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we got connected a couple years ago via politics. Forgot to mention you also ran for office in the 2022 cycle. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah.
We're a week out of a new administration, Donald Trump coming in. But first and foremost, you know, I know you, right? But want to have our audience get to know you, who you are, your Genesis story, and, we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. And for starters, too, just to keep it short, you mentioned, Defining Truth is our organization. There is, you could also go to definingtruth.org and, kind of see like what I'm about and who we are. So I run the podcast you mentioned with my co-host, Brandon Jones. He couldn't make it today, but that's our podcast side of things. And let me back up then, because you said Genesis story. So I was actually raised in Mexico. I was born in the U.S., but when I was 3 months old, my parents moved to Mexico. My mom and dad were missionaries, and they were planting churches down there. So I grew up in Mexico, going to school in Spanish, right, from kindergarten all the way through high school. Now, high school, we had actually moved to Ecuador, but still, Latin America. And I came to the States for the first time as a teenager to go to college. I graduated early, so I came early, started going to college, and then the invasion of Iraq kicked off in 2003. And that's when I joined the Army. So my journey is a long one, very ping-pongy. I went all over the place. It was there in college. Actually, I was going to college in Marietta at the Calvary Chapel Bible College. That campus is no longer there anymore. But that's where I joined the Army out of. Signed a contract to be a combat medic. Went to Fort Benning for boot camp. Which was odd at the time because I think most medics went to like Relax in Jackson or some other spot. But went to Benning, and we were told there in basic, like, you're here to go to Iraq, right? The troop surge was coming. That's what we were doing. So I did my basic time in the Army. I was nothing special. I was just with 3rd Infantry Division, 3rd ID. I will say, though, that is sort of the beginning of where, interest in certain things started to happen. And it wasn't because of anything that I did. It was just, it happened to be that I was around or with some people. So, for example, our unit commander volunteered us for a variety of things, but a few of them kind of put me in good spots for the future and connected with people. So one, we oversaw security for the Iraqi national elections, the first one that they ever had, right? Some of you may remember the purple thumb. They would give their thumbs up, proving they voted. So we were doing polling site security during that. We also did the embassy escort mission. So we were running convoys out of the, at the time, the old embassy before they built the Neck, which is the new embassy complex there in Baghdad, and another place there, Fob, Washington. We would do pickups, and we would drive U.S. diplomats and contractors and personnel all over the Sunni Triangle area. And this is like everywhere, right? Getting them safely to their destinations. The purpose of that was there was a lot of reconstruction and rebuilding at the time, right? So that put us out on the roads quite a bit, which was, pretty dangerous. We also did security for Saddam's trial. So again, right, just being around those events brought in other really interesting people, right? There was some special people around at that time. There was some contractors. Triple Canopy had the contract for Baghdad that year, the WIPS contract. This is 2005. So, I was very blessed to make it out that year. We had a really busy year. I think in the end, our unit had the second highest casualty rate in the division. So we got torn up out there. I left, though, with some lifelong connections and contacts, right? And kind of a little bit better idea of what exactly I wanted to do, right? So because of being around contractors and running those embassy security stuff, we worked around the WIPS program. If you're not familiar with that, that's Worldwide Personal Protective, I forget what the S stands for, service or something. It is the Department of State's high threat diplomatic security protection contract. So that was companies like Blackwater, Triple Canopy, DynCorp, Armor Group, Olive Group. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, right? Being around them helped me build some relationships that have lasted to this day. So I get out, right? Don't know what I'm doing in life. I'm back in the States, and within a very short period of time, I'm back overseas. So Blackwater picked me up, and I went back as originally as a medic, signed a contract with them as a medic. And then when I got in country, I switched my job designation over to PSS. So I was just running security, protective specialist security. I spent all my time there in a place called Al Hilla, which was a small, what we called a RIO, Regional Embassy Office. It's about 90 miles south of Baghdad. There was still active Al-Qaeda in the area during that time. So we would take, little things like, indirect fire, incoming mortars. Every once in a while, snipers would shoot over the walls. But for the most part, I had an easy year and really started learning more about the RSO program and, for State Department, the regional security and how they protect embassies and how we protect people and learning the sort of program side of that. I was very fortunate to work with some outstanding people way above my level, which I'm grateful for to this day. But being around those small communities, you learn a lot. So, we ran a static security guard network where we pulled 24/7 shifts and learning how to manage the personnel and, mixing in the counterintelligence part of that. And we ran a thing called the Home Guard Network, which is just us maintaining a good, intel network around our facility and then paying people to do so. So a lot of growing, a lot of learning for me that year. About halfway through that time, I got married. It's my beautiful wife, Lindsay, who is amazing. And I knew that I could not continue doing that forever, right? I mean, that is like, at the time I was on a 90-30 rotation, 90 days in country, 30 days off. So you end up basically, spending more time in Iraq or wherever you were contracted to than you do at home. And it was just untenable. So I wrapped up my time there, came back to the States, and there was a couple years break where we were figuring out what we were doing. We had our first daughter. We have 3 kids now. We had our first during that sort of gap time. And then that's when I was trying to figure out, what do I do with all this background? What do I do with, I was in the military. I had all this random security operation, high threat stuff that I learned for a little bit. I ended up going to LA County Sheriff's Department, which is, a whole nother world completely. I joined LASD, went through the Star Center, became a deputy, and then this is where I start moving around quite a bit. So spent some time at LASD, then I lateraled to work patrol down to Oceanside PD here in California. And then after some time there, I still had this bug, right, where I really missed the stuff that I used to do, right? The sort of international perspective, the terrorism angle. Because I had spent that stint with Blackwater, I remembered, working alongside these State Department RSOs and ARSOs, Assistant Regional Security Officers. They were with the Diplomatic Security Service, DSS. And I always thought, man, that was a really cool job. They do all kinds of things that people don't really realize, right? They're like the tactical side of the Department of State. So I applied to go to DSS when I first came back to the States, but I didn't have a 4-year degree at the time, and that was a requirement. So when I had joined the Sheriff's Department, I started going to school at night to get my business management degree, and I just grinded that out. I mean, a couple years, 3 years, I think at 3 years I got it. Got my bachelor's degree. I was finally ready. Okay, I'm like, all right, I'm going to apply. Then I went to apply, and there was a federal hiring freeze, and nothing moved. And so years went on. I was working patrol. I had gone down to Oceanside, and then I got a call from a buddy of mine who's back in Virginia area, and he's like, hey, the window's going to open, get your app in. So I applied, and then from that point, it took another year and a half because, you're talking getting your TSSCI, your clearance, your scope. Like it just was such a long process. So finally, right, after all those years and my pipeline of getting there, DSS picks me up. I fly out for orientation in Virginia, and we start this long journey. I mean, like months and months and months of training and schools and classes and learning the relationship between, the Department of State and other three-letter organizations in the Virginia area. And I wrapped that up. My first assignment was the LA field office. So I was back out in LA, working DSS criminal cases here on the domestic side, mostly having to do with passports and visas and identity theft and things like that, learning all the federal codes and conspiracy stuff. And then I was assigned to the Southern Nevada Regional Counterterrorism Center, and I went out there, got a desk, and started working CT stuff in Nevada. But my main focus was actually Russian, Armenian, so it was Eurasian organized crime stuff. Mm-hmm. I had a little bit of Chinese organized crime sprinkled in there, but really the purpose of my agency at the time being there, DS, was the international angle, right? It was foreign governments working with these criminal groups and how they were doing that. So I'm trying to keep this short. So we wrap that up, fast forward, I get assigned to DC. I'm back in DC working a Saudi national team. I was an advance agent for the ambassador to the United States from Saudi Arabia. That was a brand new position after having been canceled because of the Khashoggi incident. You remember that at all?
Yes.
Khashoggi was the guy that, went into an embassy in Turkey and came out in a trash bag. All right, so there was a hiatus on that position for a while. And then finally, the administration said, okay, Saudi, you can have an ambassador again. But I think there were stipulations on who it was going to be. So the incoming was Princess Rima Bandar. She's, one of the higher up as far as related to Mohammed bin Salman, who's the crown prince. But also her father, Ambassador Bandar, was longtime family friends with the Bush family. And he was, I believe, the longest standing ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the U.S. in history. So it was kind of nostalgic. His daughter gets the position, and I get this sort of like spin-up call where they're like, hey, this position's coming up. It's brand new. Nobody's been working it for a while because there was a pause of years. And do you want to be on this team? So it was only like 4 of us that originally kicked this off. And so I, dropped everything, packed up the family, PCS to DC area, and we got ready for the incoming new mission of this detail, running protective operations for the royal family, specifically for her, the ambassador. So here's where things get kind of interesting, right? So at this point, I'm nearing, like 20 years in public service all combined.
What year is this?
At this point in my story, this is like 2018, 2019. Okay. And right around that time, I'm wrapping up. So I'm done now. I've just tenured. So I was a tenured special agent with DSS, right? I was locked in, and I was wrapping up my domestic assignment. We were getting ready to go overseas somewhere. And I get the news that my dad passed away. Now, I knew he was sick, but it was kind of unexpected. And I saw the burden that it took on my mom and my family, and especially my wife, who my wife's dad retired from LA County Sheriff's Department. He did the full career there, 30 plus years. She had grown up in the very domestic environment, right? Had the typical American dream type situation where, your parents are in one job, retired from there. She didn't move all over the world. I had grown up moving all over the world. You know what I mean? And I had very clearly saw the toll that it took, I think, on my family. Just the lifestyle that I was living, right? Constantly moving, constantly gone. Even when we were assigned here in the United States, I think my last year at DSS, I was gone 273 days that year. just always on jump teams, flying around the country, staying. We'd go up, work in New York, stay 27 days straight or 23 days, whatever. So it was very busy, right? And when my dad died, it just kind of made me pause and say, where are my priorities here? Like, my wife had been amazing. She had faithfully followed me everywhere I drug us over a 12-year period, 14 years at that point. And she had never complained, but I could see that it was hard. And so honestly, this is where, my relationship with the Lord comes in. As a believer, I started praying about, God, what am I supposed to do with this situation, right? I had built a career that I had wanted for a long time. I mean, even like I described, my pipeline to even get to DSS took me like 8 years, right? It was getting a 4-year degree, jumping from this department to another, law enforcement agency here, and waiting for the window to open. And so in my mind, like, I guess financially and career-wise, I had obtained what I wanted, but there was something not right. Something was off. And so I called a good friend of mine, a pastor here in California. Actually, it was Jack Hibbs.
Yep.
He's a pastor here in Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. I called Jack and I said, Jack, if you have time, I'd really like to talk with you. I just need to run something by you. Usually I would do this with my dad, but he's not around anymore. So Jack gives me the time, picks up the phone, and I kind of just run him down what I just described to you, how I was feeling, and how, I had got everything I wanted career-wise, but I didn't know if I should be doing it or whatever. And so he gave me a very dad answer, right? Which was, I can't tell you what to do. You got to make that decision yourself. He goes, but I will say, one, it's important to listen. If you feel like God is speaking to you, you need to listen, right? 2, you're never going to regret putting your family first, no matter what. And it was almost like, it's hard to explain. It was almost like physically I could feel a weight come off my chest. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Hung up the phone. I walk into the room and I told my wife, we're moving back to California. And she's just like shocked. She's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, we're moving back to California. I'm going to resign. Now, we're actually commissioned with DSS, so I had to write a letter resigning my commission to Congress. And I had to write a letter to, at the time, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and inform him that I was leaving. So unlike what my fears were or what some listening may think, I felt such a relief. It didn't make any worldly sense, right? It was like a $60,000+ a year pay cut. I had no idea where we were going to go. Fortunately, I still had my post certification from being a cop in California. So my brother-in-law at the time was working for San Diego Sheriff's, and he calls the background unit, gives them my story. At that point, I had like 10 years on as a cop. And they're like, yeah, we'll take you as a lateral. They were super good to me. I mean, the fastest I've ever been hired on a department. It's a miracle. I don't know. It was literally 2 weeks.
Wow.
I was in Virginia sending my paper, sending my application. They were on the phone like, when are you coming? And I'm like, I'm literally coming to California. Like I resigned my job and I need to start when I get there. Dude, 2 weeks. I was wearing a suit, driving my federal take-home vehicle in Washington, D.C., and 2 weeks later, I was in a sheriff's deputy uniform working patrol in the city of Vista. It was such a big jump, right? So, again, super blessed. Came back there. We moved back to the city that we're living in now, and I didn't know what the future was, right? I didn't know what the plan was. I knew that this is where God wanted us and that's where I was going to stay, but I had no idea like why or what I was doing. So I end up there at the sheriff's department for about 2 years, and right around that mark is when the 2022 cycle comes up, and a bunch of people start calling me and they're like, you should run for Congress, right? And I have no idea what that even means at this time. Like, I've never heard of a Central Committee, didn't know what it was, right? I certainly never heard of the like Young Republicans Club or whatever. I was like, those are like nerds in college that are into politics, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea, but I knew that I had all this background in like government and public service, and I was super frustrated with the policies and stuff that I was seeing, and I could articulate the issues from the perspective of actually having done that type of work. So when I talked about crime, it was not just well-informed, like that was my expertise, right? Crime, human trafficking, fentanyl, which was a major crisis and continues to be to this day. So I kind of thought, I'm going to run for Congress as like a blue-collar public service guy, right? Not some pompous, wealthy person looking for clout or whatever. And so really it was a blind jump, but that was a wild ride. Okay.
Yeah.
You met me around that time.
I did, yes.
I started campaigning and I was still working. I had just been promoted, actually. Talk about how good the department was to me. I was working gang investigations in North County, San Diego. And I ended up realizing that this was too much to work and campaign at the same time. I go in and I talk to my boss at the time, this lieutenant, amazing dude. And I was like, hey, sir, I think I'm going to take a leave of absence, right? So I do. I run the race and I start learning like from a fire hose, right? It's like all of a sudden it was like, what is a central committee? Like all of this stuff, the process, just the campaign methods. And it was a lot. Okay, so as you can imagine, right, I'm not wearing a little fancy pin on my collar, so I didn't win. I'm not a congressman, but I learned a lot, and I got way more plugged in with what I believe is my civic responsibility, and I knew that was still the right thing to do. Again, I didn't doubt. Like, the call was to run. It wasn't necessarily that I was going to win. It was, I felt like God had called us to get involved in our society and in civics in that way to run. And my question was like, are you going to be obedient to this calling, be faithful, or, are you going to pout or whatever because you didn't win? So when I finished and I didn't win, I had this crossroads. And my wife and I talked a lot, and I said, babe, we know we're on the right track. We're called to be involved. We're called to speak out on these issues that we were really heavily involved in local politics and geopolitics. And I said, if the calling wasn't to win necessarily, can we just like quit and leave? Right? Because I had to go back to work. And the department's like, okay, buddy, like you lost. Are you coming back to work now? And I had to, prayerfully, we considered this. And we decided that we were going to stay in it. Nose to the grind. We formed our nonprofit, Defining Truth, which is, a registered nonprofit. We're considered a ministry. And our goal specifically is to speak truth and educate Christian-Judaic values into civics and politics. We want to teach the upcoming generation and anyone who will listen how to provide an apologetic for your beliefs, how to defend America, right? It's articulating America's worldview. Now, there are some, there's lots of groups, there's pundits on Instagram and all over the place that do similar stuff. Our niche is bringing in the biblical perspective. We believe 100% it is not an accident that America was blessed so much. Like, we are the wealthiest, most powerful, most benevolent nation to have ever existed, ever. And I'm not saying we haven't had problems, right? The detractor would be like, what about slavery, right? It's like we've heard that a billion times. Of course, that was evil. There's a lot more to America's story. In fact, I would say that leading the abolitionist movement, you have Christians. You have the same group of people that has maintained a steady line that is America, has been here since the very beginning and continues to this day. Christians are the bastions of American culture. They are the last defenders. And if we let it go, we're done. The country was made for a Christian population. The founders were explicitly clear about that, right? People will be like, oh, well, the Constitution doesn't talk about, God that much or whatever. Okay, but you got to read the individual state constitutions because they all do. And in the original colonies, most of the original state constitutions required citizens to be Christians. So anyways, I'm going to digress on that. This is sort of our main focus now. Simultaneously, I had the opportunity to start my consulting group, O'Neill's Security Group, and we do high-end security consulting services. And now it's grown, of course, it's been a few years. We now provide a suite of tier 1 security operations experience, bringing all that background I was just talking about and the network, obviously, that we have from that world into the domestic and international environment if needed. So we currently, as a consulting group, we have K9 EOD services, we have armed personnel services, we have consulting or executive solutions where we subcontract high-end director-level security people. We do risk analysis, threat assessment, and just recently we launched a proprietary program called the Sentry program, which, as far as I'm aware, there's nobody in the entire country doing this. And this is specifically for schools. We took our high-threat protective operation model from what we know has worked in areas like Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia and other places around the world, and we have adapted it to perfectly fit a school campus. And so our Sentry is a individual that we employ to run security operation and program management for schools. And it's going really well. We have a couple schools out here in California, and they're extremely happy, and probably most happy are the parents. So that's where we're at today. That's a long Genesis story, I know, but right now we're balancing. I run a security consulting group. We have about 30 employees total, and a great leadership team. And then we have Defining Truth, which I believe really is our main, purpose, being faithful and obedient to continue to be a light in this dark world. And we're just trying to figure out what in the world we're doing here with this.
I love it. Thank you, Josiah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, your experience and your breadth of information is so vast, and you're just a wealth of knowledge and experience. And just wanted to backtrack really quick and talk about your time in the State Department and just get your perspective, right? I think what everybody is top of mind that's following the news is DOGE, right? Department of Government Efficiency, right? That's being headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? This over bureaucratized system of government that's inefficient, right? And a lot of people have pointed fingers, right, at these federal agencies, and having been in it, right, in the State Department, a lot of people pointed fingers in terms of the corruption and kind of these bad actors. I know this is kind of an open-ended question, but your just perspective on working in the State Department. I mean, what's going on there? What's the blob, as they may say?
Well, let's start with where the buck stops, right? Antony Blinken needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually a while back we did a special 2-part series called Treason in the House. This is on our podcast, and his name came up quite a bit. I would encourage you to check it out. We discussed in depth Antony Blinken's collusion with former members of the intelligence community, as well as the Bidens and others in the current administration, to basically and corruptly take down Donald Trump. They lied. They did things which in any other day and era would be considered treason, in my opinion. So you could start with that, right? Like, you have bad leadership there. And when I say bad leadership, I'm not even talking about the potential to do basic things like run your organization. I'm talking about what is often deemed the mind virus, right? This sort of woke mind virus that infects people. And everywhere people with this mind virus go, organizations and people suffer because they're not properly aligned with reality. So let's make it specific, right? Afghanistan, okay? We could talk for hours about, should we have left? When should we have left? Everyone agreed, yeah, it would be great to get out of Afghanistan at some point, right? But the way that it was done parallels what I've seen those on the left do in every organization around the world, and it's always led to death, literally, right? Like Benghazi. We'll come back to that. So Afghanistan, Antony's running that ship. And I understand that Joe was like, okay, get out. It was going to look good for him career-wise. He didn't give a rip about anyone. Not the people on the ground, not the State Department personnel that were there, certainly not our Afghan allies, and not the 8,000 plus AMCITs, American citizens, who were in Afghanistan when they disastrously decided to do that. Now, that web is very large. But when you have people that are driven by a failed ideology, let's just call it what it is, right? You have progressive Marxism is like pop culture now. It's this whole America's bad, everyone's racist, we need to destroy the West. All of these concepts. If you're this anti-capitalist, person, everything you do is going to be skewed because your worldview, the lens through which you're viewing situations, is wrong. It's false, right? This is what Aristotle talked about on the concept of first principles, right? If you go all the way back to a first principle, an assertion that you make, well, in science, that assertion must be true. Otherwise, everything that follows is going to be erroneous. Or to borrow a legal term, we call it fruit of the poisonous tree, right? If your original assertion is wrong, everything you do after is bad. So this is what I mean by mind virus. Their worldview is wrong. It's full of problems and errors. It falsely presents a reality that is not a reality, right? We see this with environmentalism. We see this with management skills. We see this with the fires going on in California right now. Their ideology poisons their ability to be competent. So you saw this at the State Department with Blinken. You see this with Director Cheadle before she resigned at the Secret Service. And they're very arrogant with it, right? And probably most prominently here for us, you see it in Newsom at the state level. I mean, grotesque incompetence and the arrogance with which he presents his opinions when confronted is astounding. He could care less, right? Recently, I believe it was Anderson Cooper who was interviewing him on CNN. He asked him about water and the hydrants, and he just brushes it off. He's trash talking Trump, and he goes, the locals will figure it out.
Yeah, did you see what instead of being focused on what's happening in LA, the state legislature just passed a $50 million fund to Trump-proof California. That's where their priorities are.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
I know. They discussed $100 million. They ended up getting $50 million approved. Meanwhile, by the way, that's all your money. That's our money.
Yes.
Right? They're taking it out of your pocket. It's infuriating. So back to you and the State Department. So you have bad leadership because they were all ideologues. They were chosen by an administration for their loyalty to the left's agenda. That's it. Not for their competence. It wasn't because they were good leaders or they were competent or, they could figure things out. People in this administration were chosen because of their loyalty to the mind virus. That was it.
Yeah. I just saw a headline. They took a poll of federal workers. It was something like over 50% are getting prepared to resist Trump, right? And I think that's insane, right? That these people here are just openly saying, "Hey, we're going to resist the orders of the
we're going to commit treason."
Yeah. Exactly. And what's interesting to me is you're obviously a patriot and you've served your country, done it for the right reasons, but there's these people there that are just openly just going to resist, Strzok and Page in the FBI. I mean, did you encounter that? Like these specific people that were just
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So in that special I mentioned, again, Treason in the House, we talked about those 52 former intelligence officials who wrote this letter, right? Well, now in retrospect, of course, hindsight's 2020, we discovered that not only were they wrong, they lied. And that's exactly what you're talking about. The left has created insider threats. People within our government who are there to serve the people, because of their vitriol hatred for Donald Trump and Christians and conservatives, they have become insider threats. They're purposefully dismantling the American way of life. And it actually gets people killed, like Afghanistan, right? It was that mindset that ignored the experts. It ignored the people who they should have listened to. They went and found yes men. They went and found people who were like, hey, this is a political, it was a campaign thing, right? It was like some schmucky consultant who was like, you know what would be great for you, Joe? You should withdraw from Afghanistan. Absolutely no consideration for human life and the thousands of people that died and the hundreds who were executed. So yes, I did encounter that, and people still continue to encounter it to this day. It's not everyone, but it definitely exists. You have people that are so brainwashed by the left's narrative that they believe it is their obligation to stop American citizens like Donald Trump and others at all costs. You saw that with the two lovers you just mentioned, right, from the FBI,
second page, yeah.
who were taught literally like, we're going to stop him. Same thing with the former intelligence officials who knowingly put forth bad information. Why? Because they actually believed that was the right thing to do. This is the danger in doing what Hillary Clinton didn't start it, but she definitely like fueled it big time. When she demonized the opposition to the point of calling anyone who doesn't agree with you Hitler, well then anything's worth stopping them, right? We got to stop Hitler. So Hillary started that with her whole deplorable thing, right? And what started as just political dirt slinging, this is probably some like consultants throwing back ideas at a cocktail bar. And it turned into people actually believed it. And they demonized their fellow Americans, and they began to intake this progressive Marxist ideology to where they're like, yeah, Christians are in the way. Yeah, America is bad and racist. Yeah, police need to be murdered. The list goes on and on and on, to where it has real world consequences.
Yes. And I was in 2020, I just think about how literally common sense just went out the window, right? Where I saw people who I'd grown up with, I know, family members saying the streets need to burn.
Yep.
It's justified. I'm like, no, it's not justified.
Yep.
Regardless of what happened with Derek Chauvin, there's so much more there. But you're going to, because George Floyd died, that means that the cities need to burn. And people just like, the common sense was out the window, right? We couldn't go outside, but these protesters were, medical professionals signed this letter that's okay. I mean,
well, and I will say that I'm not even going to give them that much credit.
Okay.
Those on the left, I would say the majority, they're not even smart enough to actually plan that out. There's a lot of foreign intervention. Okay. And that's where I think my exposure to some things plays into my opinions very strongly. So one of the things that we looked at in depth was the Biden family's relationship with the Chinese Communist government, right? It's deep.
Yes.
Not just Joe, but his brother and definitely his son, Hunter. Now, bear with me because this is my opinion, but think about this. Joe just gave an 11-year blanket immunity pardon to his son. 11 years. It's unprecedented, right? Now, just as a normal human being, think about that. Why would you need an 11-year block in time that says no matter what you did, no matter what you may have or actually did, you have immunity? Now, if you start looking into it, that is roughly the time frame that the Biden's relationship with known Chinese Communist Party members began to increase. Hunter, right, is meeting with people while dad is still the vice president. He's going over and having coffee with CCP-linked members of large financial organizations and making deals. We have all the stuff about the big man, and obviously he's influence peddling his dad.
Yeah.
Now, the laptop, which because he's cracked out and high, he leaves it at this repair shop, and all of this is discovered, right? I think it's a miracle. And immediately the left, they banded all of their might and all their power to call anybody who called that out and said, oh man, this laptop is bad. They said, oh, that's disinformation. It's a lie. It's Russia collusion. It's collusion. It's on and on and on and on. And you know what it ended up being? It was all true. Every single word was true. Those intelligence officials lied. The Biden family lied. And what did they lie about? They lied about the fact that the Bidens and others, especially in the Democratic Party, have very, very strong ties and relationships with Chinese Communist Party members. Now, I'm just going to put this out there for anybody in case you're not tracking, okay? If you think that the Chinese Communist Party or the Chinese intelligence services does any business with high-ranking members of the U.S. government out of the sheer benevolence of their heart, you are an idiot. There's always a tit for tat, okay? You're familiar with the word reciprocity? This is what's happening here. The CCP is calling in all their favors. They have funneled millions of dollars to the Biden family. We have that. We can prove that. Nobody wants to. I've made calls and had talks and said, look, I ran federal investigations, very large scale ones. Put me on it. Bring me back from retirement. I will run that case. And nobody wants to. Nobody wants to because the implications are enormous. You have millions and millions of dollars coming into the Biden family's accounts from known CCP members. Now, bear with me. I'm getting somewhere with this. Because at first you think, oh, it's just about greed. which it is, I'm sure. The Bidens are super greedy. It's a filthy family. They're super greedy. They made millions of dollars peddling influence and screwing over the average American. But check this out. What if one day the piper came calling? What is it that Chinese Communist Party members want? What do they want? This is the question I want everybody to ask themselves, because do you think that they would be paying Hunter millions of dollars just in case Joe says something about national security? Or no. That's not how intelligence operations work. There was a specific plan and a goal. And my opinion is that goal was Afghanistan. Oh, I bet you don't. Serious listening to my conversation. Their goal was Afghanistan. Think about it. All of the years that they put into paying the Biden family, right? Who stood to benefit the absolute most from our withdrawal from Afghanistan? Obviously, there was regional and local benefits. The Taliban, the resurgence of Al-Qaeda, which is fully strong and operational. They're training people again. They're using proxies like ISIS to do their dirty work, etc. But you know who gained as far as nation state? The Chinese government. The Chinese government, and the Russians really, but China more, Chinese government never left Afghanistan. They didn't close their embassy, right? While we had U.S. Marines dying at Abbey Gate and our Afghan allies being executed in the streets, the Chinese were chilling. Their government was fine. They immediately moved in on all kinds of mineral rights deals, territory, geopolitical advantage in the region. And do you know that we left $86 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan? $86 billion. Not only of advanced weaponry, but there was all kinds of intelligence. There was software, hardware systems that we had to leave in place, tons of armored vehicles, avionics. There was helicopters. I mean, $86 billion buys you a lot at the local gun store. And the Chinese government was there to check it all out. The Russians didn't leave either. I know this because I was working with a small group of people trying to get our allies out of Afghanistan when Biden was absolutely screwing them over. And some of our communications were being messed with by the Russians. So they were actively mocking us and messing with us on the way out. And I believe that's one of the greatest intel ops ever. The culmination of all the money and effort that you put into Democrats in the U.S. on behalf of the Chinese intelligence group culminated in Afghanistan. The betrayal of our allies, the loss of $86 billion worth of equipment, the gain of untold amount of intelligence and expertise and production knowledge. And I don't even think that we'll know the depth of this injury that Biden caused America because of how he left Afghanistan. Do you know that some of those weapons ended up in the massacres in October 7th in Israel? They proliferated all over the world. We lost a strategic position. And for what? For what? We should have stayed in Afghanistan for the next 100 years. There was no reason to leave. There was less U.S. military personnel dying in Afghanistan than cops get killed in America every year. Women in Afghanistan were going to school. They were going to college and university, getting education. They were building roads. There was actual freedom that we promised these kids. Think about it. We were there for 20 plus years. Think about if you're born under the American occupation and you experience this sort of micro level of America over there where you have some freedoms and you have the ability to express yourself and all this stuff. Think about the depth of betrayal when we just were like, peace out. And now you return to this archaic medieval rule of the Taliban, who are slaughtering people, going door to door in the streets, killing people literally as we're leaving. You've all seen the videos of people falling off planes. Yeah. It's a disaster.
So it was, I believe, you can correct me, but up until that point, it was the single largest day of American casualties in like 15 years, right? And our troop level at that point in 2021 was only a few thousand, right? And we had sustained Afghanistan.
I don't know what our troop levels were, to be honest. I don't have that number, but I know that we were basically just hanging out. There was a lot of other stuff going on to our advantage on the intel side and, like I said, geopolitically and regionally.
But it was stabilized.
It was stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, based on our air superiority alone, like the Taliban couldn't touch us, nor could any other networks. Like we dominated that. And anybody who's been in the Middle East or up into that region, you would know their language is power. That's what they speak, right? It's the strongman concept. You saw that in Iraq with Saddam. You see that in Libya with Gaddafi before. You've seen that really all throughout the region, throughout CENTCOM. And us leaving was absolute weakness. They played us. We looked like the biggest idiots in the world. The Doha agreements, I had a friend who was there. What a joke, man. And I understand Trump was involved in that too, and I'm not defending that perspective, but I've heard Trump already provide an answer and others within his administration talk about it. And based on the situation on the ground, that's not how they would have left. I mean, you understand how insane it was how they left? Like, they got a call and they're like, phone lines are going to get cut. Pack your stuff. We're leaving. People left everything there. I have a close friend of mine who now works for my security consulting group. He was one of the last, if not the last, State Department personnel off the ground in Afghanistan. And he lost everything there. His suitcases, his clothes, his suits that he used when back in D.C., everything, weapons, vehicles, he left everything because I was actually on the phone with him and he's like, hey, I got to go. They're telling me the last C-130 is leaving. If I'm not on it, they're not coming back. He was putting thermite into armored vehicles, try to cause some damage before they handed him over to the Taliban. It was an absolute chaotic, uninformed, and treasonous withdrawal that endangered and the lives of countless amounts of people, tens of thousands of people, got thousands killed. The damage that it did to our reputation alone, I don't think we'll quite understand. But these people should be held accountable. Joe Biden, obviously, the generals who had anything to do with that. It's unbelievable. But see, that's the problem with the woke mind virus. That's the problem. When you hire people, when you put people in positions of authority based on their loyalty to this anti-American ideology instead of their competence, you're not going to get the kind of people that can tell you the truth when it matters, right? Like, are you seriously telling me that nobody around Joe Biden was like, hey, sir, this might be really bad. Like, this is going to be bad for us globally. We're going to hand $86 billion of equipment possibly over to the Chinese government and the Taliban. Like, nobody said anything. It's infuriating. And that's not the only instance. We could go into Benghazi too, because that was also State Department's debacle.
Yeah.
But Hillary was running that one.
I'd love to get into that, but want to get your perspective, right? You talked about the Russians being there, and what I've been monitoring over the last few years is what seems like a budding alliance of shared goals and vision between Russia and China. What's your perspective on that?
I think China will use whoever they need to use at the time. I don't think they're best friends with Russia, but they're certainly better friends with them than they are with us. All right, same thing goes for North Korea. I think there's a tit for tat that goes on quite a bit there. That's why you've seen North Koreans in Ukraine, deployed there. I think that's again, that's a little bit of agreement. Hey, we helped you. Now you scratch our back. I think that there's great geopolitical advantage for China and Russia being allies, mainly because of what it does to us. So we're the issue, right? I don't think China could care less about Russia unless we were a dominant world power and we're a problem for them. So geopolitically, you're right, for people who may not quite understand, Russia's issue is it's in large part landlocked, right? So because of the way the Cold War ended and how NATO has sort of encircled them, we're just a constant threat to them. They have all kinds of other internal problems. Like, they're losing people at a crazy rate. They're generationally, not having enough kids. Like, they got all kinds of problems. If you look outside of Moscow itself, it looks like a wasteland. It's very poor. Putin runs things like a mob boss because he is a mob boss, right? But Putin, as a former KGB officer, I think is still super bitter. He's never been happy at the way the Cold War ended. I think he hates that United States won the way it did. And China is only benefiting from that animosity. China can keep us distracted by stoking fires with those willing to carry them out. Russia is one of those. That's why they had military contractors in Syria. Obviously you have the whole Ukraine-Russia war going on. Russia's constantly antagonizing us, and China's only providing fuel for that, or they do, because while we're all distracted with that kind of stuff, China's moving into Africa in an incredible way. AFRICOM for the U.S. has been very busy over the last, decade now, really. Again, minerals that I mentioned that they were interested in Afghanistan, was a lot of that going on in North Africa as well. Minerals to make things like batteries and lithium and stuff like that. And of course, the more distracted we are in the CENTCOM region and up into Eurasia, more resources pulled that way instead of watching like the South China Sea and what's going on in Taiwan and China's obvious expansion goals. There's a great book called The 100-Year War.
Yeah, by Michael Pillsbury.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a good breakdown. Not everyone agrees with it. I'm very curious to see what happens in the next decade or so, because China also has a population problem, and they're running out of food and they're running out of fuel. So they're like a ticking time bomb. They have to do something to expand, or they're gonna lose. I think the estimate was like 3 to 6 million people will starve. So they have some major issues, and really we are the biggest stumbling block for them, right? Because of our regional control. I mean, really because of the Fifth Fleet alone, we are a dominant power on the seas. So again, I don't think they're best friends with Russia, but I think that they mutually benefit each other. And China, right? You got to keep this in mind. China steals everything they have. Like all of our technology, like they're very, very good at that. That's why American universities are full of Chinese students whose mommies and daddies work in high-level positions in the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's like every other week you read of some like student from Yale who gets arrested because they were handing like nuclear secrets to their dad, who's a general in the Communist Party. And of course, if you mention that in America, everybody's like, you're a racist. Like, you can't say anything about it because, we've created this culture of fear where you have to be like embarrassed to be American. It's ridiculous. And that also makes sense with what I was saying earlier. Like, their intellectual property theft is like they're masters at it. So think about the like how awesome their prize was in Afghanistan, where we dumped $86 billion worth of equipment. That's out of control, dude.
Yeah, King's ransom right there. What do you think about NATO in the current state of affairs, the impact and influence it has? I mean, obviously talk about the Ukraine-Russian war. I mean, what are your thoughts on NATO? I mean, Trump's talked about, obviously lessening our involvement and potentially even leaving. I mean, what are your thoughts on NATO?
NATO was a good idea when it started.
Yeah. Stop the spread of the communist,
But NATO's been completely infiltrated
Mm-hmm.
by people who hate the United States. And of course, because we have half of our country that also hates the United States, they hate themselves, and I'm talking about the Democrats. That's a great advantage to NATO and to our enemies around the world and those who oppose us. I just read, I think this week, right, Trump's talking about increasing NATO's input from 2% to 5%.
Okay.
I mean, even that is not enough, in my opinion, but I mean, it's a big step up. We give them all the money that they use to hate on us. It's like the same thing we do everywhere. We're doing the same thing with the Taliban. We're still paying them millions and millions and millions of dollars that they in turn use to train terrorists and fund operations carried out by ISIS and other places.
Are you familiar with Mike Benz?
No.
He was a State Department official. He's been on Sean Ryan.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I do know. I only know it because you mentioned the Sean Ryan podcast. Yeah.
Yep. And right, he talks about tanks to Twitter, right? The white paper
Yeah.
that, circulated through NATO, and that, any negative voice that goes against NATO, right? They parrot, it's a Kremlin talking
Oh, yeah, they're
point.
insane.
And it's so interesting too, because you've seen it, on the left, right? And also on the right, the neocons, I think it's interesting, right? Like everybody posted the black square in 2020, and now you have people that have the Ukrainian flags. I mean, I'll just go through, North Park over here, and I'll see people flying the Ukrainian flag without an American flag in sight.
Everybody's a social justice warrior,
right?
They don't even know what they're talking about half the time.
Exactly. And I just think it's so fascinating, right? It's less, obviously we still have kinetic warfare point, but the information warfare point of just convincing large swaths of people to get on board and just hook, line, and sinker. They're there.
And well, and China's always
Yeah.
got us beat on that. I mean, look at TikTok alone, right?
Yeah.
ByteDance. I mean, the future is definitely cyber. Obviously, with the advent of AI, we've seen this explode. Even my consulting firm, we're now focusing on countering AI. If you don't, you're going to be left behind 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of our greatest threats, certainly right now, is on the cyber side. And I don't know how that is exactly, but it has something to do with tech. So CISA, right, and infrastructure issues. We've already seen a bunch of dry runs, right? We had CISA stuff in Oregon along the west coast of the United States that was hit not too long ago. You know, some people talk about EMPs. I guess my point is the weak point is technology, whether it's in your cars you drive. I mean, look at California, how ridiculous California is. I drove a truck today here that's diesel, and it has, you know, a DEF limit, DEF fluid, and the state will limit my speed remotely. If my DEF fluid gets low, they set the limit to 65 miles an hour on the freeway, which I'm not getting into an environmental debate. I'm saying the government's too big for its britches. They've gotten to the point where you can reach out and stop somebody's car, right, as a state government. Just imagine what our opponents globally can do with that. And China's on it, man. I mean, you know, it's like Gavin Newsom, I think, recently visited his friend Xi Jinping, and he had this atrocious quote. I saw it on the news. He said, the one good thing about a dictatorship is you can get a lot done, right? Like, what a psychopath. But he's right in that sense, that these sort of, you know, evil countries like North Korea and China, they just force people to do what they want. And so this mass manpower capability, well, they've applied that greatly to cyber and hacking, and that's a problem because we have to stay competitive. Now, I know that we're tracking that. I know we're aware of that because I know that from being plugged into the community that we're trying to, you know, stay on top of that. But that is an emerging threat, which continues to be a problem. There's a dual issue there. One, that's a problem from our enemies globally and those who oppose us. Two, it's a problem from these insider threats that we've described, because if you were raised in a home that hates America, that thinks our founding fathers were all bigots and racist, and capitalism needs to be destroyed, and all this stuff, if you've believed all of that nonsense, and then you went out of high school, went to like UC Berkeley or something, you are fully indoctrinated. Now, what happens when I put you at the CIA or the NSA? And you are now an insider threat, or at least vulnerable to being so, right? Because the first time some Communist Party member calls pretending to be, you know, a frat party friend, and they're like, yeah, man, we hate Donald Trump too, you know? Like, and we've seen examples of this. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
That is a huge danger, I believe, we as a nation need to deal with. In fact, that's exactly one of our focuses on our ministry side with Defining Truth. Like, we know right now we have 4 years to get a hold of the next generation. 4 years. Think about it. You could be 14 years old right now, and the next election, you're going to be voting. It's a big, big deal. And that's our goal, is to kick up the gears with Defining Truth and go into overtime to educate and inform this next generation that, hey, you don't have to be consumed by self-hatred. You don't have to believe everything you see in the mainstream media. You don't have to, you know, believe the narrative that in oftentimes is being generated by America's opponents in Eurasia or China. You don't have to buy into this hook, line, and sinker. You know, you can be proud of your country and know that there's right and wrong, and more importantly, understand what made us great in the first place. Because if you can understand that, then you can continue to do that, or defend it at least. All right? That's the whole point of the book, actually. It's 10 chapters, and each chapter is a culture war topic or point. And what I did is I wrote it to where I present the issue, and then I talk about what America originally believed about this issue, what the left or those who oppose America believe about it, and then what the Bible says about it. And so I present the topic in that way and try to equip you with the ability to stand firm in that particular area. And actually, it's really interesting. We go into some, like one of the chapters is called Love. And that's actually one of my favorite chapters, is chapter 4. And it's really interesting. I mean, we talk about, like, what does the world say love is? What does God say love is? And how have America's enemies used that manipulation to hurt America? So that's kind of what we did with 10 chapters. But you see how it all fits, though, because you can be all up on the strategy side and the physical, the kinetic side, but if you miss out the culture war side, you're going to continue to lose. That's a big problem. It's extremely frustrating to hear Republican leadership in this country brush off the culture war as if it's a waste of time. It is the only thing worth fighting for right now. And you know who knows that better than anyone? The left. Anytime somebody asks me, like, why are you on here debating like trans issues and this and that? I flip it right back around on them and I say, oh, you don't think it matters? Why don't you ask yourself why it matters to our opponents so much? Why are they harping on it every single day? Why are they ramming it down your kids' throats from kindergarten all the way through college now? Why? You ever stop and ask, like, why is it so important to them? Because it has a real cultural impact. Because progressive Marxists realized years and years ago that if you wanted to get at countries like the United States, Western countries with Christian-Judaic backgrounds, you had to attack their ideology and their worldview.
100%. And I reference the Frankfurt School, right? Gramsci,
Absolutely.
Theodore Adorno, right? And so the backstory of that is they came to the United States in the 1930s. They're Marxists, right? Coming from,
the Fabian Society.
Exactly. But capitalism has worked in America, right? Just looking around, and then I think they found themselves in Los Angeles and the beauty of Santa Monica, and right, and they realized, okay, we can't attack the economic system. We have to attack it culturally. So we'll use the same framework, right? The haves and the have-nots, but the oppressed versus the oppressor, and that's what they've done over the past 80 years. They've found their way into the institution, into the educational curriculum. And the thing that people, woke and all these radical policies, they think that just popped up 12 years ago. No, it's been circulating in our institutions, and now it's bubbled up to the surface, and now it's omnipresent.
You ever watch, there's a great documentary called Agenda, Communism in America. You ever seen that?
I don't think I have.
Oh, man, it's so good. I'm going to go watch it again. It's good. It's very educational, but this was, I'm going to mess up his name. I should just look it up. He was, I believe, a state rep in Ohio, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere out there. And he's the one that produced the documentary, but he tells a story about how he was at Berkeley back in the 90s, and a friend of his asked him if he'd like to go to this local communist meeting. And his friend was going to like monitor them, like not because he was a communist, he just wanted to see like what were they about. And he kind of brushed it off as a joke, and he's like, no, you should go because I can't make it or whatever. So he ends up attending, and he said he was totally surprised that the meeting wasn't a bunch of like, first semester, kids, that it was like doctors, professors. These were like people who were seriously there to propagate something, right?
Yeah.
And he said everything they talked about, their goals, if you're to skip forward to today, they've accomplished almost all of them. They were all based off Cleon Skousen's, The Naked Communist, which is another book, where he was the famous FBI counter-communist agent back during the Cold War. And he outlined these 40 objectives or goals that the communists had set out to do. And they were all culture war issues. It was like convincing people that sexual immorality was actually totally fine and that God didn't exist. These were goals that the government was doing. There was stuff in there about convincing people not to have guns and how they were bad, purposefully making art ugly. That was one of the weird ones. But you have to read it. It's good. The whole point was, this is how the communists figured out, like, this is how we'll destroy America. Their strength was in their faith, their family, and their patriotism. And if you could tear down those three problems, America would fall from the inside. And so basically in the documentary, he's like, you skip forward to today, and they've done it. They have convinced an entire generation that promiscuity and sexual immorality is normal. Parents are old and stupid. God doesn't exist. The list goes on and on and on. They have successfully brainwashed or created this mind virus that enables them to take more and more control. I don't think you see that anywhere better as an example than here in California.
Yeah. Things have been literally tipped upside down, right? Again, referencing 2020, we were arresting people who wanted to open up their small businesses, but letting rioters, run amok, like it's been flipped on its side. And I think what's fascinating though is the fact that we see the ramifications of this just on a psychological level and like the collective consciousness of our generation, where people are depressed, anxiety, our life expectancy has actually gone down because of deaths of despair. And then just as a result, like people are more obese, they're like unhappy, and that's a direct result of just all of that. All this just
Yeah.
you know.
Let me just throw this wild concept out there, right? What if God was right? This is what I want America to stop and think about. Like, what if you were created with a purpose? You were designed to know and worship your creator. What if all of the prescribed methods of life that God presents in the Bible are actually good for you? One of the points we make in the book I wrote is God does not arbitrarily set rules. In other words, he doesn't just say like, I don't want you to have, 50 partners and never get married because it's arbitrary. No, it turns out that for human happiness, that's actually not a good thing. Like, what will make you most happy is actually finding someone and loving them, or, raising a family. And it's not just good for you personally, it's good for your society and your culture. Strong families make strong people, and strong people make strong countries. So what if the founders were onto something, right? What if George Washington was right when he said you cannot run a country without God and the Bible? What if Patrick Henry was right when he said we're not a country of religious people, we're a country of people who believe in Jesus Christ? I mean, these things are based on natural law, right? Which we got from England. The founders took it and said, we have tried every other method available. During the Constitutional Convention, they sat down and they looked at governments throughout history, and everything had failed over and over and over again. Franklin said, man has two problems, ambition and avarice, the love of money and the love of power. And what they acknowledged or identified as the only successful counter to man's proclivities and problems was God. And so as a result, the United States is born. And a nation unlike any other country to ever exist, founded from its very inception on what they believed the Bible said people should do. This is where we get our concepts of liberty, justice, freedom, equality. Everything comes from the Bible. And it was a trial run. And the result was the largest, most benevolent, most beautiful, most powerful nation that has done more good for the world than any other empire in the history of the universe. By far. It was young Americans, right, who defeated the first Axis power in World War I, who died by the thousands to ensure the stability of Europe. It was young Americans who stormed the beaches of Normandy again and defeated Hitler. Not because they, just randomly went there. They believed in something. They believed in the ideals that were America. They believed that there were actually some things worth dying for. One of the chapters in the book is called Sacrifice, and we go really in depth into that. What happens to the American psyche when you take away what they believe is worth dying for, right? Would you die for your wife? Would you die for your kids? Would you die for your mom? What happens if I strip any concept of worth, of human value out of your brain? What's worth fighting for? This is what you've seen happen in countries around the world. It was young Americans who defeated slavery in the 1860s during the American Civil War to the tune of almost 1 million people dead. Most of them young white dudes, by the way, because they believed that it was wrong. The list could go on and on and on. When Indonesia has a tsunami and millions of people are without food and water, the United States sends medical aid ships to the tune of billions of dollars, right? To this day, we're sending aid all over the world. That would not be possible if it weren't for the roots and foundations that made us who we are. So America First and that concept is actually the best thing for the world. The strength and might of the Fifth Fleet, like we mentioned in the U.S. Navy, is maintaining the Pax Americana right now. I guarantee this is why you don't find the anti-American vitriol as strong in other countries as you do in our own. Because our own, the left has become extremely ignorant. They have taken for granted everything they have. But if you go talk to people in other countries that depend on the U.S. military, right? Go talk to people in Taiwan. They really appreciate a strong geopolitical stance from the United States. So do the Germans when you talk about Russia and natural gas pipelines. The list goes on and on. If we don't get back to what made us strong in the first place, we will fall like every other nation or empire, if you want to call it that, has in the past. And we will fall the same way. We will disintegrate into self-absorption and self-worship, where we were like, thanks God for all the cool stuff. Thanks for the beautiful country. Thanks for this and that. But we got it from here. We got it ourselves. We don't need strong families. We don't need morality. We don't need patriotism. We don't need the Second Amendment and the concept of self-worth and life, because that's what the Second Amendment is rooted in. These things, they're outdated. We'll take progressive Marxism. Well, how has that worked for every other country that's tried? Remember this. More people died in the 20th century than the previous 19 centuries combined. And that was all under left-wing ideologies. That's a hard number to argue with. You know, I would start a conversation with your Democrat friends just right there. Be like, your belief, your ideology led to more human suffering and mass death than any other century in the existence of humanity. How do you explain that? And they're, we would do it better. We would be better communists. It's asinine. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yep. Well, let's talk about how we're going to fix it, right? I mean, Donald Trump got reelected. Were you surprised he won?
I would say that I wasn't surprised he won. I was surprised at the magnitude of his victory. That legitimately shocked me. I was up doing a live feed that night, and as information and data was coming in across the states, it was like, upper, lower house, the states surprised me, Supreme Court. I mean, it was just like one thing after another of like total sweep victory. And I thought, man, if this isn't a message to the left, I don't think anything ever will be.
Yep. What does he have to do once he gets into office to fix the problems of the last 4 years?
I hope, and I don't know much about the incoming team. I hope he does what he did last time, in a sense that he keeps the right people for the right job around him, right? That's, I think, one of his strongest suits. Everybody talks about how, they get mad because he tweets something that they don't like. But the truth is that one of Trump's greatest advantages was in finding the right people for the job. And that's his business background, right? And that is, by the way, what a good leader does. So you want to surround yourself, not by yes men, but by competent people, the best people for each subject matter. And if he can do that, we're going to be on a good track. Now, this is it, right? For Trump. I mean, it's the last hurrah. We have this is his last cycle. And I view that, like I was saying before, as we got 4 years to prep the country, because the pendulum is going to come swinging right back, right? The left isn't disappearing. So we need to do as much as we can to solidify American values in this country before another onslaught occurs. Because that's what the last decade has been. It's been an utter onslaught on American values.
Yeah. What do you think are some things that Doge should focus on in terms of?
Oh my gosh,
government?
there's so much. There's so much. I think it would surprise people though, like some things that probably should stay and some that shouldn't. So I don't buy into the whole like. I'm not an anarchist, right? Like, I think that's ignorant. I think there's some people are like, just get rid of the whole government. Well, that's ridiculous. Like, you need government. We are a very large, massive nation. You need bureaucracies to an extent. We just need them to work properly. Like State Department specifically, for example, right? I would massively increase DSS and their programs. Their capability and reach, special agents are the foremost U.S. representatives of law enforcement globally. They are the front lines of really the primary method of foreign intelligence officers entering the country via passports, visas, et cetera, the border. It's an organization that has not received as much attention as it should. Most people don't know the history, but it used to be called the Secret Intelligence Service. and it changed due to not wanting to call it that, because all of our opponents were like, "Oh, you work for the Secret Intelligence Service." I think I would expand their capability and training. I would replace the current model of sort of just the DEI, throw anybody whatever they want, actually put some good vetting and good training and make use of their, especially on the law enforcement capacity. That requires congressional approval. Maybe even float the idea of DSS becoming their own entity. Right now, they still fall under management and M. And I think that they could probably benefit from what the Navy did with NCIS all those years ago. NCIS, broke off and became its own entity. I think that was probably one of the best things for NCIS. There's other things like, when we talk about wildland management and stuff like that, some of it's not necessarily, DOJ I don't think needs to erase. They need to figure out, they need to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, right? They need to figure out, what is the purpose of you existing, and are you doing it well or not? If you're not doing it well, you need to go. And there are certainly, there's fat in some areas, right? There are agencies that are just a complete waste. I think the Department of Education should be completely overhauled. Completely. We literally have to purge communists out of Department of Education. The teachers' unions.
Randy Weingarten.
Oh, absolutely. Randy Weingarten is the greatest threat to America. Absolutely. You know who said that? Mike Pompeo. I was at an event. He was on a panel speaking, and people asked him, he was the former director of the CIA and then Secretary of State.
Yep. I had lunch with him and met him, yeah.
Someone asked him, what do you think the greatest threat to America is? And he said, people often say Iran, China. He goes, no, it's the teachers' unions. Yeah, insider threat. They're brainwashing an entire generation of Americans inside our country to be anti-Americans, and that's a problem. So, yeah, I think DOJ should pay them a visit for sure. And then, of course, the list of federal agencies and expanse is out of control. So they have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, talking about three-letter agencies, right? I know we've been talking about that, but FBI and CIA, some of the unchecked powers that they have, some reports that more and more truth has come out about January 6th and the FBI's involvement in that. What do we do with their unchecked power, right? They ran rampant with, Russia collusion, with these warrants for the FISA court. What do we got to do there?
Let's correct some misunderstandings. So first of all, that's definitely an area where I kind of mentioned before, where there's an emotional reaction to say, get rid of them all, Well, okay, the FBI does a lot of good work. They should.
Yes.
And it's not, so that's the first thing. We need agencies that protect the U.S. homeland. Okay, that's important. Even if you've called it something else, I don't care. But somebody has to do that job. And it's funny how detractors online, they want to delete the FBI, but then when a terrorist attack happens, they're like, "Why didn't the FBI do anything?" And I'm like, "Well, which is it? Yeah. Do you want them well funded to stop, threats to, the homeland, or do you want to delete them? Like, which one do you want to do?" So I think they need to exist. And the second point, because I hear that a lot too, is, well, they're unchecked power. Well, let's be clear. They weren't unchecked. They were being ran by anti-American individuals. So, the FBI is absolutely has conducted themselves in the most atrocious anti-American way ever in the last 8 years or so. But it wasn't necessarily unchecked. They were doing exactly what the administration told them to do. And these are elected people. So the Biden administration weaponized the Department of Justice. So it wasn't like the FBI did it unchecked. They purposefully put anti-American actors in those roles. And then they carried out the bidding of the government. So we have a deeper problem. The problem is deeper than just let's get rid of this government agency. The problem is deep. We have a deep-rooted problem with people in this country who hate their own country. They certainly hate Christians and anybody who, maintains this conservative traditional perspective. So I think that leadership has a lot to do with it. And I think that's really important because every agency I've worked with, right, and I've worked with a lot of different federal agencies, there's good people and bad people everywhere. I don't understand why people think the government is this mysterious animal that's like one person. It's not. It's actually just a parallel of the United States. Like, it's 50-50. The government service people are just American citizens. They also pay taxes. So you're going to get like half and half. Voted for Trump, voted for Biden. Like, you know what I mean? So do we need to destroy or delete the agency? No. How about we give them good leadership? How about we give them people who are going to set a precedent? Now, that being said, I do think a purge is required, 100%. I do think you need to find people that committed what I believe is treason against the United States. You need to find them and you need to remove them, for sure. But that doesn't mean that the entire agency of tens of thousands of agents needs to, or serves no purpose. Right? I mentioned I worked the Eurasian Task Force, which is based out of a city here in California for a while. The FBI heads that task force. We were looking into really bad people, doing bad stuff. Not only that, but internal corruption too. So, I mean, you can't just delete their positions, right? You need good leadership.
Yep. Now, talk about corruption in politics, right? I mean, we all see it. I mean, when you stepped in the political arena, I mean, what were your eyes awakened to, right? You talk about just, the corruption on the Republican Party, right? I mean, let's talk about that, what you saw from your perspective.
You're trying to ruin my future political career. No, let's do it, because I'm
defining truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've probably heard me, or maybe I don't know if you have, but I've talked about this quite a bit. It's no secret. We got a lot of house cleaning to do, especially in California. What was most shocking for me, as sort of a public service, blue collar background, right, to enter into that world, was just the depth of like ignorance, I guess, that exists. Like, I had no idea who really controls things. I went in like wholeheartedly believing the things that I was saying. I'm a true believer. Like, when I talk about I love my country, I love my country. I believe that God blessed America and that we need to get back to those values. Okay. What most shocked me was the depth of like fakeness, if I could say that. Like, people who don't believe in anything. They're just trying to win a seat. And for whatever purpose, power, ambition. It's like, like this ambition and avarice. Like, who knows? Like, and the belief and capacity was not enough to get elected. They want money. And I have a big problem with that. Big time. I did a big event, which you can watch on YouTube, called Faith in Action. It was an event that we did at Chino Hills with Pastor Jack Hibbs. And Jack and I were on stage, and we were talking about how Christians can get involved in politics. And somehow this came up about the local like political process, or it's national as well. And I was shocked to see the amount of concern towards money versus content and character. And I said there that we need to reverse that process. So it's not lost on me that you need money to run. Obviously, you do. It costs a lot of money to run in a place like California. You need to pay for media. You need to pay for ad spends. I get it, right? But right now, it's like the cart before the horse. Instead of looking for candidates with good content and good character and competence, we look for candidates with a bunch of money. And then whoever has the most money, they get to move forward, right? I mean, you're familiar with how, what's the, I'm just blanking out. What's the name of the young, what do they call it? When you're like a newcomer and you can get that bonus.
Young Guns?
Yeah. It's all about money.
Yeah.
It's a Young Guns. If you're listening, you don't know. It's like the RNC will get behind, or is it RNC, or is it, what's the name of the group that's behind it? I forget.
It might be the RNC or the House Republican Leadership Fund or something like that.
They get behind you, but they'll be like, oh yeah, we'll back you if you're like a first time or young guy running for Congress or something. But they want to see you hit at least like $500,000 in your first quarter. And when I remember when I was talking to somebody about that, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you need to make money, son. And what else? And they're like, well, that's it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, we just want to see you make money.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what about the things that I'm saying? What about like competence? What about like would I be a good congressman? Like, can you actually like lead the country and people that elect you? Like, You know what? Oh, no. We want to see whoever makes the most money, we're going to get behind you. Right. And their whole strategy is like, that's what works. And my retort to that in California is, really, has it worked, guys? Has it worked in California? Because are you sure about that? It's like, it doesn't work. It has not worked. Getting behind people because of money does not work in California. You do need the money, yes. But how about this? There's plenty of donors, right? Orange County alone is one of the wealthiest counties in the world. So how about this? How about we find competent people who can actually get out there and do the job and get what needs to be done, and then we back them with the money. How about that? Right? Because I can't tell you how many places I went to speak or like candidate forums where all people wanted to see was your financial disclosures. And every time I did that, I thought, I've spent my entire life serving my country, whether it was in the military or, in law enforcement, all of these frontline type dangerous jobs that I've done. And all people care about is how much money I've been able to beg people for. It was very, very frustrating. I had one particularly annoying phone call from a ranking member of the California GOP who called and told me during the race to quit. And he was very mad at me. And I was respectful and I declined, and it made him frustrated. And eventually he said, I'm just going to cut to the chase. You need to pay your dues. That's what he told me. You need to get in the back of the line, were his exact words. And I thought, let me get this straight, right? My multiple deployments to combat zones, my service in law enforcement, that's not paying my dues to speak up for people. What paying your dues in his mind was, you need to go to a bunch of central committee meetings and like intern for somebody and show us that you can raise money. And I was disgusted when I heard him say that. My wife could tell you I was so mad. I didn't let him see it. I hung up the phone respectfully and I called my wife and I'm like, this is sick. This was like halfway through the congressional run. I was so mad because I was learning and I was realizing this is how the world works here.
Yep.
I couldn't find a single person that cared about the things that we were talking about. They just wanted to know how much money you had. And you know what? You know what the worst part about it? They lose constantly. It's like nobody won. No Republican won the seat that I ran. I ran in the 49th, and they didn't win this last cycle either.
Well, they lost 3 seats. The Republicans in California lost 3 seats in an election that was a red wave election where Donald Trump, carried, won the Senate, won the House, and California Republicans lost 3 seats. I mean, right?
Well, they're still on this whole thing of like, we can't talk about the culture war, right? Sacramento still wants you to believe that. Like,
yeah.
You got guys like Bill Asaley up there tearing it up, making waves, and it's all the Republicans that are mad. Oh, you got to be quiet. We're going to lose our budget. You're cowards. Dude, I don't even know if I want to go down this road, but it is very frustrating to see the level of cowardice and the lack of character. Like, where are the men? You know what I mean? Like, let me just talk to the boys for a minute. Like, can we get the Republican Party to man up? Like, be a man. Like, do your job. You know what I mean? Like, stand up for something. Do you believe in anything? Speak out. So what if it costs you your seat? If it costs you your seat for speaking out, you should be proud to have lost that seat. You shouldn't be there in the first place because you're completely irrelevant in that seat to begin with. Nothing is changing. It's a supermajority state dominated by the left, and the Republicans just play the game to make money. And it's very, very frustrating. And I know for a fact that not everyone there believes that. I know you have a lot of frustrated people, both in Sacramento and constituents and other places, but everyone's afraid to do anything because this is just the way it is. That's the constant narrative. We need a revolution in an ideological sense within the conservative party here in this state. And we need it to be backed by both the establishment and the grassroots. And I think that's the problem is right now we're completely split. So the grassroots will throw random, almost like crazy characters where normal people are like, you're really weird, man. And then like Sacramento will throw at you establishment, like you're not even a Republican. We don't even know what you are. You just have a lot of money. And so you have this battle between, the establishment and the grassroots, and there's nobody in the middle who can actually go to Washington, put on a tie and speak like a normal human, but isn't, beholden to, the third house and, all the donors and all of that stuff. So, I don't know, man, where the end of that is. I don't know.
Do you think we have to pass some more legislation or go to court, right, to end PAC contributions or special interests? Or
I don't think that giving money is the problem. I think the character is the problem. I mean, think about it. If I needed money to win, because running in California is very expensive, why would I not want money from a PAC to help me? The problem is when the PAC thinks they own you. So it's not really, you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I don't really have a problem with where the money, you need the money. The problem is whether or not you have any character at all. Like, are you that weak, like, and sold out that someone gives you money? If someone donated to me during the campaign, I'd be like, thank you very much. I will now continue to do what I'm doing. Like, if you want to help me, then great. I'm going to use it for the goals of obtaining the very things that I believe in and talk about. I think the problem is if you don't believe in anything in the first place, you can't stand or fight for anything.
yeah,
And I encountered that quite a bit. I mean, one of the reasons, the sort of inception of why I wrote the book was because those 10 topics in particular, I kept getting into conversations with people and they couldn't explain them or defend them. And I'm talking about conservatives. I had one guy in particular, famously, he said, I was talking to him about, I think the issue was marriage and why families were important for strong societies and whatnot. And I remember he looked at me and he goes, why does it matter? And at that moment, I was like, that's the problem with the Republican Party in California. You don't know why our core values even matter. So you can't defend them. You can't look for people who are going to defend them and speak strongly on them. And so you're just a loss. That's why the Democrats dominate us. And people are sick of that too. You know what I mean? Tell me you're not sick of listening to sleazy politicians go up there and give an excuse for everything and quietly, bow to the left's narrative of hating America. I mean, it's just like, geez, dude, like, can we just get somebody to stand up and, like I said, like, be a man? And conversely, if you're a woman, be a woman, be a strong woman, speak your values and truth, stand up for what you believe. Even the Bible says, right? The idea of being lukewarm is disgusting. Even God says you'll be vomited out of my mouth. I'd prefer you be hot or cold. That's how I feel with the Republicans in California. I want them to get up off the couch and get to work. But in order to do that, though, see, you can't ask somebody, if you're not picking up what we're talking about right now, then that ain't going to work, right? Like, you need somebody who actually believes in these values and is willing to defend them, not based on whether or not they make their budget or not.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic, where this country's going to go. So I keep the faith, right? I think, God's working and we have work to do, obviously, but, I'm remaining positive that there's people like you that are getting out there and, showing people the light in the darkness, right? People that are speaking boldly and courageously, and they can look at somebody like you who's lived a life of service, of courage, and be someone to follow. And, and I hope you run for office again and get in. Are you going to run for office?
I don't think I'm not going to. That's a weird way to answer that.
Yeah.
I guess I'd have to see if God opens opportunity for me to run or even serve somewhere, with a lot of changes coming up, new administration. We have gubernatorial races coming up pretty soon in California. Like, I would love to just serve anywhere. I don't really know. I don't have a need or an ambition for like power or some position. I legitimately would like to do some good. I would legitimately like to be in a position where I could influence these things that we're talking about into the next generation. Wherever that is, that's where we're heading. Maybe it's through my nonprofit. If an opportunity comes to run again, I would. I will tell you, though, I don't like the 95% odds losing for a Republican and running a seat against 16 or 17 other Republicans. Like, that was a nightmare. When I ran in the 49th, there was way too many of us running. The pot of money from donors is split all over the place. And like I said, because of the current sort of method of candidacy leaning, it's all about money. And it's like, I'm not going to sink, millions of dollars of my own money into a race that there's a 95% chance of losing. That's not always the case, but I would like to see what happens. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe if I could serve in any capacity in an incoming administration, or whether it's local, county, city, whatever. I think that's also a door that, I've been looking at. So I don't know. How about you? Are you going to run?
I would say no. Knowing what I know now, I feel like I can be who I want to be in more control of my destiny here in front of a, microphone and a camera, right? And not, like you said, for these politicians that are, forced into a box or don't have the courage, right? I think
it is rough too. It's a rough world, man.
It is rough,
You know what I mean?
man. It's nasty.
Mm-hmm. It's really rough. And then you see why we're in the state that we're in. You got to give it to the left. It's funny, we talk about like being lukewarm, hot or cold. Like you got to give it to the left. Like they're all on board with their worldview and narrative. Like they're all on the same team, and they're like religiously devoted to
100%.
their progressive Marxism. And it's just like, we can't find that, or you can, but it's harder to find that on the conservative side. People who are like that devoted to standing up for truth and defending, our values and in the political sphere. I don't know why that is. Like we have an issue with that. Everybody wants to like not make waves. They're more worried about appeasing the left than they are their own constituents. That's a predominant issue in California, and I think why we keep losing. There's no shortage of votes here. There's millions and millions of conservatives in California. Notably, speaking of that, if the same amount of people that voted in the last presidential election, the one before this one, if the same amount of people voted in this one, we actually would have won the state of California. But 4 million less people showed up. I'm sorry, 2 million on the Republican side, 4 million on the Democrats. They just didn't show up. And I think that's because of what we're talking about. I think that without explaining it in detail like we are, I think the average American is not stupid. They see those problems and they're just sick of it. I think if you give people hope, you can light a fire again. And that's what we need in California is we need hope. People need hope. Someone that they can say, that's a guy that I'll vote for because he's not going to be beholden to the Democrats or to this machine that hates America. So we'll see.
How do you think the fires in Los Angeles may affect things going forward? I mean, it seems like it could be just a strong rebuke of if people's eyes aren't opened already of just how mismanaged and incompetent the people in charge have been.
I think there's a little bit of both. I've seen both already. There is a core dedicated group of leftists who are like, we love Newsom and communism and we'll be there for life. And they're already making all kinds of ridiculous excuses about things. And like, it's the whole gaslighting, like don't politicize the fire. It's like, that's exactly what you need to do. Because it's not about now. Like they couldn't have stopped the fire from happening now. It was the last few decades of mismanagement. And that's what is political. And you should talk about it because that's what you do. When a team loses over and over and over and over again in the NFL, you eventually start looking at the coach, right? It's common sense. And we don't do that in politics for some reason. So there's a core group of people who have held on to that and they're not going to change. And it's a small group. A larger group I've already seen is these fires have been kind of a wake up. You see that in Hollywood. You see that with a lot of celebrities that have chimed in. I even see that just sort of anecdotally in like my social media following. The demographic is like shifting. A lot of Californians from previously like predominant left-wing groups are shifting over and starting to say, you know what? Maybe everything they told us was a lie. CNN analyst had a great perspective on that. What's his name? John King? I forget his name. Don't quote me on that. You can look me up on Instagram. I have the reel. He was when the election was like wrapping up. He is CNN's like main chief political analyst or something like that. He was speaking to a panel of all like Democrat CNN talking heads, and he just goes on this like 3-4 minute diatribe of how they were wrong. They were wrong about things they said about Trump. The American people didn't buy it. That calling people racist and Hitler and Nazi because they cared about the price of gas or about cleaning up their streets and crime was wrong. It was tone deaf. And he's like, we have a lot of learning to do. This is what he's saying. It was a great little talk. And he said that the mainstream media was in large part to blame for that. They propagated things that were just flat out not true. Flat out not true. Same thing happened with just recently. I saw Zuckerberg. Mark was on Joe Rogan's podcast. And that's a whole other story, by the way. But one little aspect of that long conversation was Zuckerberg said, when Meta started realizing that some of the COVID like censorship that they were doing, it was not like true or false. It was just straight up like ideology censoring, like telling people that if you wore a mask you would be protected, like was a lie, like straight up. And when some of that stuff started coming out, right, and where Facebook starts looking Orwellian, like it's 1984, and you realize that, he's like, that's when we were like, okay, we're going to stop this. Now they're going to that community-based note system instead of the like super bipartisan, super partisan independent fact checker. It was just a bunch of communists from Berkeley on there shutting people's accounts down. It was out of control. So the fires, I think, have led to even more of that, even more, because we already saw the impact with the election, and they blew people away. The margin that Trump took was a shock, I think, to a lot of people. Now with the fires, I think it's just another talking point, right? All of their talking points are crumbling. The whole like cops and racist thing totally crumbled, right? As crime sweeps through California cities and has destroyed small businesses all up and down the state, right? In-N-Out, I just heard Lindsay Snyder talk about how they've only ever shut one In-N-Out in the history of the company, and it was the one in Oakland, because out of 365 days, 284 days, there was a police 911 call to the parking lot. I think the fires are just another talking point that just got dismantled systematically, because if you check MSNBC, CNN, none of them are rolling with the whole environmentalism nonsense. It wasn't that. It was just straight up incompetence, bad management. It was Newsom saying, I'm going to protect the smelt fish instead of the people. It was things like CEQA and that type of legislation that puts enormous amounts of red tape on clearing forests, for example, so you don't start forest fires. They won't do it. And they don't even exempt organizations like Southern California Edison, who needs to cut down trees and clear forest beds so everything doesn't burn, right? So yeah, it was another wake-up call, which I just did a special on the wildfires. It was like, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. Like, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about it. But.
100%. Well, let's end it on that note, Josiah. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, for like constant, like day-to-day updates on stuff as we sort of newsjack and tune in, I would follow us on Instagram, Defining Truth. You could search Defining Truth or just my name, Josiah O'Neill. And on X, we put out info there on kind of like current event stuff. You can watch the podcast on YouTube. Again, Defining Truth. We, if you want to see, our faces, then we're on there. And we have, recently we've had some really cool guests on there too. So the show's getting pretty interesting. You can watch it on YouTube. And then of course you can listen to podcasts anywhere, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, etc. I would definitely check out our website, definingtruth.org. You can buy a copy of our book if you want a hard copy. And all the other links are there as well. There's a link tree there. And you can check out kind of what we do, what our goals are as an organization. And by the way, if you are an angel donor and you really believe in the stuff we're talking about, we could use your help. We are through and through a nonprofit 501c3. And if you feel like maybe you can't like run for office or get out there and speak to people, maybe you can support us financially. That would be huge, because we need it. And 100% of it goes to maintain the organization. We currently, I'm not saying we'd like to be here forever, nobody takes a salary or a dime. So all incoming financial support goes to help us like travel to speak somewhere or print more books, or something for the organization that it costs us to maintain. Definingtruth.org. But definitely follow us on Instagram. So you can do that right now if you're listening.
Thank you, Josiah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.